at you, but I want to leave plenty of time to have a discussion. And I'm happy to take not only questions, but answers, advice, pushback, feedback, criticism, whatever you have. So thanks for giving me some time to just be with you tonight. And thanks for all you do as nurses, by the way. One of the most honorable professions um, that we have. And I'm particularly grateful. Um, so I want to say just a little bit about our office, and you alluded to it in the introduction. You know, we have a lot of responsibilities in state law, some in the state constitution, but I'm going to focus tonight on the responsibility that gets the most attention, attracts the most interest, and yes, also attracts the most scrutiny, and that is elections. So we oversee the Minnesota election system. Now, here is what we don't do, what we have never done, and I'll bet this office will never do. We don't count votes. That's not at all what we do. We post on our website the counts that we get from other places, but we don't do the counting. The counting happens, as many of you know, in literally thousands of places across Minnesota. It happens in townships and cities and counties, and it's intentionally spread out and decentralized. That's the way we want it. We have a bottom-up system, not a top-down system. And it's your friends and neighbors who are doing the counting. We need 30,000 election judges every single November election to run this system. And my guess is that maybe one or two or more of you have at one time or another, even for one time, been an election judge. If so, thank you and bless you. We need you. So we don't do that. We don't hire or train or pay those election judges either. That all happens at the local level. So what do we do? Well, way before anyone votes, we do things like certify for use all the elections equipment, the tabulating machines and the like, to make sure they're in good working order, that they're not compromised, that they're safe, that they're accurate. And then after everyone votes, we do things like post-election audits and reviews, make sure the math and the numbers line up. We certify the election, as it's called, make sure that it's official. And then in the middle, we do all sorts of things. We spend a lot of time at the legislature when it's in session, like now. I was testifying at 8:15 in the morning this morning. We testifying a couple times next week. We're very active there. We do a lot in the way of legal advice and policy guidance for those cities and counties and townships as well. So as a result of all of that, I like to say that I and we in our office are in the democracy business. And I'm sure you've noticed it is quite an interesting time right now to be in the democracy business. I am an optimist long term about democracy in America and democracy in Minnesota. Does democracy over the last few years sometimes feel a little bit dinged and dented? Yeah, I'd say so, in my opinion, but not defeated, not even close. We've got institutions that are built to last, and we've got the resolve, and we've got the people, particularly in Minnesota, that can overcome even the worst and most difficult challenges. And we have recent experience to prove that, which I'll get to in a little bit. So I remain a long-term optimist, but in the short term, there's no question that we do have some challenges. I would say even some threats. I'll talk about those as well. But maybe a good starting point is to acknowledge and repeat what I'm sure many of you know, but it's fun for me to repeat anyway, which is that Minnesota is really a champion when it comes to voting. I'm sure you know this. Year in and year out, very consistently, going back decades. This isn't about my tenure in office. This goes way back. Minnesota is usually at the very top of the list of voter turnout every single time. In Olympics terms, since the Olympics just got done with, we are almost always on the medal stand. We're almost always bronze, silver, or gold, third, second, or first in the nation. We recently had a streak going of 3 times in a row when we were number one in America in voter turnout in Minnesota. Just think about that. 3 times in a row, the top voting state in America. Now, what about the last election? You might be asking. What about 2024, the last big statewide election? Well, it depends whose numbers you believe. If you believe the numbers put out by the federal government, we were again, for a fourth time, number one in America in voter turnout. If, however, you believe an equally reputable set of numbers put out by some academics at the University of Florida, they had us at number two, missing the number one spot by 0.2%. Can you imagine that? 0.2%. We just barely missed being number one, according to their numbers. That's not the worst part. The worst part is they had us losing to Wisconsin. And that is
Oh,
intolerable, whether it's in sports or elections or anything else. So if you believe that set of numbers, we'll get them next time. If you believe the first set of numbers, we already got them this time. But the point is, we do very, very well year in and year out. By the way, just as a footnote, in 2024, here's a number that nobody disputes. In 2024, we were, according to all sets of numbers, number one in America in voter turnout for youth, for young people, for 18 to 29-year-olds. We were, with a little cushion to spare, number one in the country. And that really bodes well, I think, for the future, because those younger folks are getting involved. There's been kind of an awakening, and those are the kinds of good habits that are going to really reflect well on Minnesota going forward. 2024's 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are going to make it a lifelong habit. So that's good. But you can imagine, given my job, that I get asked a good bit about whether I have a theory about that. People will say, well, okay, Steve, you say you're in the democracy business. What's your theory? Do you have a theory about why Minnesota does so well, so consistently, so often in voting? Why are we always number one, number two, number three in the country? What is it? Is it something in the water? Is it coincidence? Is it luck? What is it? Obviously, I don't think it's any of those things. I have a theory, and you can push back if you think it's false or incomplete or anything else. But my theory is it boils down to two things: good laws and a good pro-voting culture in Minnesota. Let me explain that a little bit. In terms of the laws, um, I think that if we were to do an exercise on this call, which we don't have time for, but let's say we did, and we said, hey, let's just start over. Let's just bulldoze every single election law, chuck it out the window, and start over on this call and workshop it and figure out, we'll just design it from scratch, everything, like how old you have to be, where you do it, how you do it, all that stuff. We just redesigned it. I think in the back of our minds, whether we put this name on it or not, we'd be looking for the perfect blend of two things: access and security. I think in designing any election system, you're always looking for that perfect blend. There's no such thing, right? There's no such thing as perfection, but you're reaching for that. You're going for that. You're looking for that sweet spot of those two things: access and security. Access meaning, hey, let's not make this thing an obstacle course. Okay, let's make it straightforward. Let's make it simple. Let's make it approachable. Let's make it accessible. Security means, of course, hey, that's great. Let's have that access, but let's make sure that only eligible voters and no one else is taking advantage of that accessibility. So no two people on this call or anywhere would put that perfect sweet spot in the same place. If you were to plot it on a graph, let's say, there's no objectively right answer. Oh, here it is. This is it. We found it. This is the exact perfect intersection of access and security. So it's a subjective thing, obviously. But in my opinion, I think overall, over the last, say, 50 years, Minnesota's done a really good job with both of those. Let me just give you a couple examples. I promise it won't be a long laundry list. But to me, sort of the foundational one, maybe the jewel in the crown, was what Minnesota passed in 1973, so over 50 years ago, which is same day or election day voter registration. It's huge. We're all familiar with the concept that you got to register to vote before you vote. And what is voter registration? It just means two simple things. And sometimes that gets a little clouded. It's one of those jargony words, but it means two things. That's it. Very simple. To register to vote, you just have to show that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live. That's it. Identity plus residency. You live where you say you are who you say you are. You live where you say you live. That's it. And in Minnesota, thankfully, in my book, we have a long and flexible list of things that you can use to show one or both of those. It isn't just a government issued photo ID, although that's very, very common. There are many different ways that you can show one or both of those things. Okay, so that's voter registration. But since 1973, Minnesota has said to the world, hey, as long as you can show that stuff, we don't care if you do it up to and including election day, game day itself. You can waltz right into your polling place having never voted, or maybe you voted a while ago, or you moved, or you had a name change, or whatever the reason may be, you've got to do it again. You can do that on election day. It doesn't matter to us, as long as you can show the stuff. But even 53 years later, that is not the rule in most of America. In most of America, to this day, as we're sitting here, the rule is that if you aren't registered to vote, say it's usually about a month before the election, that's it. You're done. It's an absolute cutoff. And it doesn't matter if you were sick or just moved to the state or misunderstood or anything else. So in most of America today, you can't register to vote on, say, Halloween. That's not a thing. It doesn't exist. It's unlawful. You can't do it. You miss the cutoff in early October. There's no such thing as registering to vote after early October. But in Minnesota for 53 years now, we've said, yeah, we're going a different way. We have a different approach. As long as you can show the stuff, we don't care if you wait till the last minute. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about good laws. Another example, we have the law passed 13 years ago, that says any of us who are eligible to vote, we can vote from home. We can vote by mail. We can have the ballot come to us so that we can vote from our kitchen table or our couch. We don't have to go to a particular place during given hours in a given physical location on a given day. We can. I like to. That's how I like to vote. That I guess you'd call it traditional way. I have two kids at home. I love to bring them to the polling place. I like to thank the election judges. I love the carnival atmosphere. I mean, you'd expect me to say that, right? Given my job, but that's how I like to vote. But for a lot of people, an increasing number of people, they like the flexibility of voting from home. They can do their research. They can put the ballot down for a day or two or three, pick it up again, do a couple Google searches, look at the candidates. People increasingly like that. And I like our multiple choice system in Minnesota. Incidentally, we have three ways you can vote. One is in person on election day, the traditional way. The other is in person before election day during the absentee period, which is Minnesota is 46 days. It's a long one. And the third is to vote by mail from home. But that vote from home law, which I have to say was my bill during my last term in the legislature, so I have some pride of authorship, um, ended up being a really a wise move for Minnesota for a number of reasons. One of which was, and we could never have predicted this, of course, in 2013 when we passed it, 7 years later, we'd be in the middle of a once in a century global pandemic. I don't know what we would have done had we not had that law on the books, because we saw in Minnesota what many states saw, which is a massive surge that year in the number of people who wanted to vote from home and stay at home for all reasons, right? This was pre-vaccine America, remember, in the November election of 2020. So recently, there have been some newer laws passed, things like pre-registration for high school students. 16 and 17-year-olds can now pre-register to vote so that they're all ready as of midnight on their 18th birthday. They're good to go and they can automatically be added. We have automatic voter registration for many. We restored the freedom to vote to people who left prison behind. A 20-year debate that affected about 55,000 Minnesotans. We did that a couple of years ago. But my point is, we have good laws, and not just on access, by the way. Everything I've mentioned so far is on the access side of the ledger. What about the security side of the ledger? Equally as important as access. And let me give you an example. It's voting by mail, voting from home. Sometimes someone will ask me this question, and I think it's a totally reasonable question. Someone will say, Steve, how can this voting by mail thing be secure? How on earth can it possibly be trustworthy? You're talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe even a million or more ballots in Minnesota, just floating around there in the air, floating out. Maybe it's, in a post office or in the back of a truck or being delivered to residential mailboxes, just out there, blank, blank. And you're telling me this is secure? How can that possibly be the case? It's a fair question, but here's the answer. In Minnesota, we have security features that very few other states have. Namely, and some of you know this if you've done it, when you order that ballot, you're not just ordering a ballot. When you order the ballot, you now have to provide both Social Security information and your driver's license number. And when you receive it, you have to sign the ballot. You have to get a witness to sign the ballot who's an eligible voter in Minnesota. And when you send it back, you have to use the same two forms of ID that you used when you ordered it. In other words, send it back with a driver's license number, send it back with the Social Security information, as well as ordering it with those same numbers. So back to the mailbox thief. Let's say there's a mailbox thief that's casing the neighborhood, trying to pluck 1 or 10 or 100 of these things out of mailboxes, okay? Will he be successful? Can he be successful in voting 10 times or 100 times from these stolen ballots? Well, the only way he'll be successful is if he knows both of the forms of personal identifying information that you used when you ordered the ballot, and he forged your signature, and he forged your witness signature. Unless all three of those things are true, he will not be successful. He can send those things in, they'll be shredded, they'll be destroyed. And the voter, once they discover that the ballot hasn't come to them, can and will order a new, fresh ballot for themselves. And it's probably why in my entire time in this job, I don't recall one single case, not one, of a mailbox thief type person who stole an absentee ballot and was able to vote it. So access and security, the laws I think have served us well in Minnesota. No system is perfect, ours included, but I think we've gotten it mostly right over the last 50 years, which is a good thing. But remember, I said that, in my opinion anyway, the secret to our success with high voter turnout is not only laws, it's also culture, laws and culture. And when I'm talking about culture, I'm not talking about the culture wars or any of that stuff. I'm talking about simply a habit or a way of doing things. What is our habit, our way of doing things, our pattern? What is ingrained here? And I think it's safe to say that in Minnesota, we have a very healthy pro-voter culture. It starts in our schools, which I think do a very good job of getting out this idea that, look, elections matter. They're worth your time, your attention, your energy. A lot of people get elected to a lot of offices in this country, and what they do or don't do when they get to office really has downstream effects on the rest of us. We get that message. We vote for more offices in America than any other place in the world. They don't have elected school boards in Germany. They don't have soil and water board in Japan. We have more offices than any place else. We vote for a lot of people for a lot of stuff. And I think we get the message here in Minnesota that that matters, that that's significant. And we get it from our business community, and we get it from our nonprofit world, and we get it from even the media culture here in Minnesota is very healthy that way. You may like or dislike this or that media outlet, but you can't say that elections aren't covered here. They are covered extensively from multiple angles. And so we have that benefit, but that's also where you come in, the cultural piece. You as community leaders, you as nurses, really have a role to play in persuading not just other nurses or not just other people in the healthcare field, but friends, neighbors, colleagues, relatives, that voting is worth doing, that voting is consequential, it's significant. And part of that to me involves the reasons to vote, and maybe to some extent the reasons not to vote. I visit a lot of high schools and colleges. I talk to a lot of young voters, and I think I'm now up to just this term in office, just this the term I'm in. So I'm up to 73 high schools and 46 visits to colleges and universities. So I go a lot. And I talk to them about why they're interested in voting or not voting. And in terms of not voting, some of the reasons I hear are things like, well, the math reason, right? Hey, I'm only one person, and if I stay home, it's not going to have an impact. Um, and we know that there are many frequent elections in Minnesota every single year that I have been in office. There's been one or sometimes multiple races in Minnesota that have been tied or decided by one vote, tied or decided by one vote, including where I live. I live in Hopkins, and 2 years ago, we had a city council election that was decided where I live by one vote. Not my fault or my wife's fault. We voted, but surely there's maybe a couple down the street that didn't vote that day and maybe supported the losing candidate who, if they had voted, would have been up one instead of down one, right? In an election that was decided by one vote. So that's the math reason. Another reason that I hear is particularly from young people, but people of all ages, is the idea that there's so much stuff on the ballot, right? That, hey, look, I mean, have you seen this ballot? There are 24 contests on this thing. I have an opinion on like three or two or seven or 11 or something less than the 24 contests. And so, I'm not sure. I don't have time to become an expert on all this stuff and all these offices. And I don't know. I'd almost feel bad if I was voting. It would be like I'm voting for the coolest looking lawn sign or the most interesting sounding name. And that doesn't seem right either. So, someday I'll grow into this, but because I only have an opinion on seven or eight or 11 or whatever, I'm just going to stay out. To which my response is always very clear, my opinion. But I say, you know what you should do? If you're in that situation, if you're in that headspace, vote for what you know and leave the rest blank without 1 ounce of shame, not 1 ounce of guilt. Look, if the choice is between you not voting at all or voting for something less than 100% of the contests on the ballot, that's a no-brainer. Your ballot is not spoiled. Some people think that. They say, well, I thought if I didn't vote in every contest that my ballot's no good, that it's tossed. Nonsense. If you vote for seven, they'll count seven. If you vote for 22 of the 24, they'll count 22. But just vote for what you know. Someday you will have an opinion on all those offices, but until that day comes, don't get in your own head about it. Just vote for what you know. By the way, who's going to know? We have a secret ballot in this country. It's not like you walk out of the polling place and there's a tattoo on your forehead announcing to the world that you didn't vote for every contest. That's your secret to keep. But don't feel that you're less than, worse than, not smart enough, or anything like that. Just vote for what you know. That's what I say. And then finally, I hear from people, again, not just young people, but I hear this among young people who say some version of this. Maybe not these exact words, but at least the vibe is something like, look, I'm not voting because I'm disillusioned or even disgusted with politics, politicians, campaigns, candidates, broken promises, lack of outcomes, all the negativity, all the intensity. I just, you know what? Wake me when it's over. In fact, some subset will even say, you know what? Yeah, I'm not voting, and I want you to know I'm not voting. I'm not sheepish about it. I am sending a message here. There are things or people or processes I don't approve of, and I want you to know. I hope you get the message from me not voting. And, the best rebuttal I ever saw to that was a t-shirt I saw a few years ago. And the t-shirt said, failure to vote is not an act of rebellion, it's an act of surrender. I kind of like that. That one hit home with me because, look, I mean, my theory is when you turn 18 in this country, if you're a citizen, you get a lot of things. Hopefully, a slice or two of birthday cake, a present, a pat on the back. The other thing you get at midnight on your 18th birthday, whether you thought about it or not, care about it or not, want it or not, the thing that you get on your 18th birthday at the stroke of midnight is formal political power. That's what you get under our Constitution. And when you don't use it, when you leave it on the table, you really are kind of giving up. At the very least, you're sort of doubling someone's vote who disagrees with you on everything. If there is such a person, imagine someone who disagrees with you on everything. You're voting or they're voting. You're not there to sort of offset their vote. Their vote sort of gets through. And so, in a sense, you're doubling the vote of someone that you disagree with everything on. But that's the reasons not to vote. What about the reasons to vote? That's part of this cultural piece as well. Um, I have a theory on that too. And my theory is that too often when we talk to folks about the reasons to vote, the reasons that they should get out there and be voters, the arguments tend to focus only on what I guess I'd call the good deed arguments, meaning, hey, you should vote because it's the right thing to do. You should vote because people fought and bled and sometimes died for the right to vote in our country. And those are totally true. And we should always talk about them because they're true and they're compelling. But I don't think it's enough. I don't think that alone. I think it's about adding more to it. And the more, in my opinion, is to say, you know what? All those things are true. Do you know what else is true? This is in your personal interest to do. This is in your self-interest to do. This is not an act of charity. This is not like a blood drive, right? For those who have given blood, I'm talking to a bunch of nurses, so you know this better than anyone. The pitch for a blood drive is, hey, would you please do this kind and selfless thing that is very likely going to help someone you'll never meet. You'll never meet them. They'll never meet you. You might have saved a life or prolonged a life or something like that, and you'll never know and they'll never know. And that's a beautiful thing. But that, I think, is not sufficient for voting. Yes, there's a good deed aspect to it, but I think the pitch has to also be, you know what? This isn't a blood drive. This isn't saying, please, out of the goodness of your heart, will you do this selfless act and vote and help your community? It's, look, this is in your interest. And why is it in your interest? The way I see it, it's in everybody's interest because people and communities that vote tend to get more attention. And when you tend to get more attention, you tend to get some more of the things that you want. It's all about the tendencies. It's not a slam dunk. I'm not saying to anyone, I never do. All you have to do is vote and all your wildest dreams will come true. Of course not. That would be foolish and naive, and I don't say that. But if you're playing the odds in life, if you're rolling the dice, as we all do every day when we get in a car, right? I mean, we're making judgments about likelihoods and probabilities, right? Um, if you're rolling the dice, playing the odds in life, if you and a community you attach yourself to vote, you're going to get more attention. And then once you get that attention, you are more likely than you otherwise would be to get some of the stuff that you want. And when I say community, by the way, you and a community that you attach yourself to, that's a fill in the blank sort of exercise. It's not for me to say. I view it as a community is any other cluster of humans that you attach yourself to. A community can mean fellow nurses. A community can mean fellow residents of St. Paul. A community can mean fellow hockey fans, whatever it is, not for me to say. But however you or however the voter attaches themselves to another cluster of humans, that's a community. And if you vote in higher numbers, you're going to get more attention. and therefore be more likely to get some of what you want. But again, that's where all of you come in because you can be ambassadors, particularly younger people, but really all people. You have a place of trust. You know, all the polls show. I hope you know this. In terms of occupations that people trust the most, nurses are always way up at the top of the list. By the way, I just checked this. Do you know who's the very top? I'm sorry to say it's not nurses, but do you know who's number one in the last poll that I saw? Firefighters. So if you ever want to have a public ambassador for something, just find a firefighter, right? That's the ultimate ambassador. But nurses are way up there on the list. And so you have a real opportunity to make some noise and close some arguments. Um, because of the position that you hold in the public consciousness in Minnesota and nationally. People really respect nurses and nursing as a profession. And we have opportunities in our office that I just want to say a little bit about. You know, we do a vigorous work in voter outreach in our office. We have a small but mighty team, and we have a philosophy. We have a theory that we think has worked well on voter outreach. Namely, we have to operate through trusted voices. It's probably not very often going to be us. It's not that people distrust us. It's just that people are like with anything, voting or anything really, they're more likely to listen to someone, either an individual or a group of individuals or an organization that they trust, that has the credibility, the history, the relationships, the legitimacy. Um, and so that could mean you as individuals or collectively as an organization to reach out, especially during that sweet spot between, let's say, Labor Day and the election, that 2 month sweet spot between early September and early November, when there's maximum attention and interest and intensity around the election. That's where you could really make a difference. And we in our office can help you do that. I mean, you're perfectly capable of doing it without us, but let me just tell you some of the things that we offer that you might want to consider. So we have a great director of voter outreach and a small but mighty team that does that. As I said, we can't be everywhere in a state of 5.7 million people in 87 counties. So we work through and with organizations and individuals that are known and trusted and respected and legitimate in communities. And that can mean professional organizations, that means religious organizations, that means sports organizations. And just so you know, I hope you know, we never touch candidates. We never touch political parties or ideology or anything. It's just about voting itself. We don't ask and don't want to know someone's political views or anything. And we do this all over the state. We don't look at red versus blue or zip codes or anything. We try to be very balanced on that. And we just want to get information out. And it can be very simple things. You would be shocked. Well, maybe you wouldn't be shocked how much a decision to vote can turn on these technical things. And I can't tell you the number of people who, after an election, say, well, I just didn't know where my polling place was. Or I was a student going to school in Iowa and I just assumed that it meant I couldn't vote in Minnesota. Or I didn't realize I could vote by mail. I was sick and I didn't realize I could, or I was hospitalized and I didn't realize that there were processes that could help me vote there. I thought I had to go to a polling place no matter what. So those are the kinds of things that any participation or any information, I should say, can really impact. So I'll give you an example. And we have like all sorts of tools, ready to go, hands-free sort of tools that we can give to any individual or organization. So we do fact sheets that you can hand out if you ever wanted to do that. We can put your logo on them or we can co-brand them with our logo. We don't need the attention. If you say, hey, we want this for a meeting, and could you put our logo on it and no one else's? That's great. No ego from us. We just want the information to penetrate in the best way possible. Or if you think for some reason, no, we want a co-brand and your logo and our logo, we'll do that too. Or if you just want our logo, we'll do that. So we have a range of fact sheets, like physical fact sheets.
Steve,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I just
yeah,
wanted to kind of backtrack. I think you
yeah,
mentioned the most trusted profession in America, and you said firefighters.
yeah.
It's actually been nurses for several years.
Oh, really?
Firefighters were called out in 20 during the kind of what happened in 2011, but nurses have
Okay.
been the most trusted profession for several years. I just wanted to make sure that
I
you
stand
20
corrected.
Yep,
I stand
especially in
corrected.
in this audience, I think it's important that we call that out.
No, of course. I was teasing you a little bit. But I did
Okay.
see a poll. I did recently see a poll. I don't know who did it. Maybe it wasn't a good poll that had firefighters number one. But I trust you that maybe all the rest of them or most of the rest of them have nurses for sure. Um, but my point is, so what we'll do is we don't just provide fact sheets, we provide opportunities for people or organizations to do this Zoom calls. So we have what we call lunch and learns, which we can tailor to any organization. If an organization says, "Hey, can you do a lunch and learn for our group?" You can either come to one that is populated more generally by all comers, or you can talk to our director of voter outreach and get one that is tailor-made for your organization. We do these sort of voter 101s, which are kind of related to that, where we can do it again by Zoom. We don't have to do it physically. We have a social media toolkit where we can share with you or any organization, opportunities to post things on various social media platforms. And we have photographs and GIFs and, other things, logos and things that you can post. We put out election calendars. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is we have more than doubled the number of non-English languages that we use. It was once five, now it's 11. That's something that's important to me. I'm the son of an immigrant, so I know how that works and how important that is. Um, so we have a variety of opportunities, both in written form and in online resources, where we can plug you into ways to get this out to the community. I'll give you an example that is pretty frequent. Sometimes we'll go to an organization and we'll say, look, um, would you consider in your September or October email or newsletter or whatever, just putting a PS? It doesn't even have to be prominent. It's just saying, hey, as you know, there's an election coming up. Go to mnvotes.gov to find out more. That's our website. And on that website, by the way, on the homepage, you can type in your address and up will pop all the information you need. Your precinct, where you vote, all your districts, like what congressional district, what legislative district, what county commissioner district, all of that stuff. And here's my favorite feature. We have a sort of sample ballot feature because a lot of people are not fully aware of what's on the ballot in their area. Like this fall, there may be a lot of people who say, okay, I know there's a governor's race and I know there's a U.S. Senate race, but are we even voting in my area on county commissioner or school board, or was that last time, or is that next time? You just type in your address and that comes up. Not only it shows every contest, every candidate for that contest, and a link to their website if they have one. So it's a great feature where you can find out a lot of information. But what I'm saying is it can be something as a simple link in an email letter. Hey, election coming up, PS, for more information, go here. Or it could be something more. We can work with you on what might work in a particular instance. But the point is, we're eager to work with you either as an organization or as individuals so that you can help. You can be ambassadors in getting the word out about the importance of voting and the rules of voting. Sometimes people are sold on the importance. They understand it. They want to. It's just they either misunderstand or lack information about what the rules are and what the laws are. So I'm encouraged. I really am. I think there's a lot of energy around there, out there around this coming election because there's so much that's on the ballot, up and down the ballot. And a lot of people are motivated and animated and enthusiastic. It's sometimes enthusiastic dislike, both at the same time, but there's some real energy out there, I think. And I would be honored to have your participation in any way you'd like and put any one of you in touch with our Director of Voter Outreach, Melanie Hazlip, who's fantastic, about ways to plug in and make yourself heard in getting others to vote and get the information they need to vote. So I want to stop there because I want to leave plenty of time for your comments or questions or answers or advice or anything you have. I just want to thank you for this opportunity and for being really good partners in the democracy business. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. I want to start out by saying somebody who worked in voter outreach last time who left at the end of the cycle got reached out to me and MNORN.
Oh,
And so I've attended a number of the lunch and learns, and during the election cycle last time, we did put things in our newsletter that
oh,
we
great.
got from, and we'll look forward to doing that again. And it's good to have reminders of all of the different products that you have available to us. And that me being going to those doesn't mean other people can't and shouldn't because they're very, very good. And Melanie's a good partner.
Yeah, she really is.
Hmm. So I'm wondering who's been an election judge? Anyone?
Trying to read the chat here.
I um I was an election judge.
Kathy,
Well,
I want
thank
to
you.
sign up to be an election judge. That looks
You-
fun. I have several friends who've done it.
It's awesome. A super
It's
long
great.
day, but really fun.
Yeah, it is a long day, but it's great. And what I always remind young people, students, is remember, it's a paid gig. It is not a volunteer job. You get paid. Under
Mhm.
state law, they have to let you out of school. Under state law, they have to let you off of work. And I say to young people in particular, it might look good on a resume or application. And so it's wonderful. And we really do rely on, again, 30,000 people to step up to the plate and do that job. So I encourage any of you to do it who want to do it. It's a great front row seat to democracy.
So when I did it, I was assigned to a precinct that wasn't my own, so I didn't know people. And it was, I wrote about it afterwards, and I said it was in the shadow of the Capitol in one of the high-rise places, and there were people from there were so many different languages. I felt like I was at the UN, and people were bringing their citizenship papers, and they were so excited. Um, and I kept on. People would give me their license, driver's license, and I'm like, and there was a poll watcher, and I was like, well, you don't really have to give that to me, but I was so glad they did because then I could see how to spell their name when I looked them up. Because it was before the iPads. It's a little easier now, I think, but um, I had the most amazing time, and I could hardly move by the end of the day. And they had us do everything, so like I was a newbie. So I started out being a greeter and then they'd move me to do something else. And by the end of the day, they said, oh, you should be in charge next time. I'm like, oh, I don't think so. But
Why not?
it was a really, really good experience and highly encouraged doing it.
Maggie has a really good question in the chat.
Oh,
Oh, about
let me
today.
see. Oh, the President Trump's emergency? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that with alarm, great alarm. There was an article in the Washington Post today about a group that is and I want to be very clear here that who is suggesting to the White House. It didn't say the White House was going to do this or whatever, but there's a group that claims that it is proposing to the White House a 17-page executive order that would urge the president to declare a national elections emergency on the basis of Chinese interference with the 2020 election. And then on the basis of this alleged Chinese interference with the 2020 election, that the president should impose a 17-page executive order on elections. I worry about that because it's part of, pretty serious pattern recently. The president, a couple of weeks ago, you may remember in an interview, said he wanted to, quote, nationalize the elections, said he wanted to, quote, take over elections. That's a direct quote. He said in about 15 places. He didn't say who the 15 were. I don't know whether we're on the list or not, but the Constitution is really clear. It's Article 1, Section 4. It says that states are in charge of the time, place, and manner of elections, except Congress can step in, as they have from time to time, like passing the Voting Rights Act, right? Congress can pass a law, but it says nothing at all about a president, this one or anyone, just kind of waving a magic wand in the Oval Office and start, writing executive orders to take over parts of the state-run election system. If you want to do that, pass a law through Congress, but you can't just wave a wand and do it. And he did that once before in March of last year. He issued an executive order purporting to impose nationwide a documentary proof of citizenship requirement to register. which is basically the SAVE Act, which is going through Congress right now. So Minnesota joined with 18 other states. We went to court and we won. We got that stricken because, as the court said, you can't do that. There's nothing in the Constitution about a president just announcing that he's going to take over parts of the election system. So, um, I don't know everything that's in this executive order. And again, in fairness, the article didn't say the White House was eager to do it. It just said that there's a group of people urging the White House to do it, and they consider themselves allies of the president. I'm pretty confident, depending on what it says, that we would win again in court. But it is part of a pattern that I see of the federal government trying to kind of move in on state authority over elections.
I'll jump in. Several times we've heard this president say that you won't have to vote again in the future.
Yeah.
And I take that very seriously because he likes to broadcast his moves long before he actually does them. And what can we as ordinary citizens, whether you're Republican, Independent, Democrat, do to ensure that voting is our constitutional right? What can we do to protect that?
Well, part of it is the courts. You, through Secretary of State or Attorney General or whatever, can push back and make sure we're pushing back in the courts to make sure that the authority that lies outside the Oval Office continues to lie outside the Oval Office, and the courts see it that way. And then, encouraging those who hold those views to hold positions of power. Um, I just think calling people on that is important. Saying it out loud, getting others to say it out loud, that that's wrong and not constitutional and not in the rules, and then acting on it by encouraging others to litigate, go to court. I mean, that's the key thing. The courts have been great, I'd say, so far. They don't always rule the way we always want, but overall, they've been a good, um, that they have drawn the right lines overall, I'd say.
And Mr. Simon, it always amazes me that 250 years ago, those people that came up with all of those important aspects probably didn't know that we would need it 250 years later.
It's true. It's true. But, I mean, most of these structures are pretty wise and have withstood the attacks. They have. Now, like I said, does it sometimes feel dinged and dented a little bit? Yeah. But not defeated, not destroyed by any means. And so that's why I'm a long-term optimist, right? I mean, we've had a lot of stress tests. We've overcome them. And I'm not saying just because we have, that means automatically the next stress test we will. I just mean we have a history of doing that, and we have examples of doing that. And I'm confident that in Minnesota we're going to get to where we need to be, which is putting on elections that are fair and accurate and honest and secure. Again, there are threats. I don't want to sugarcoat it. My optimism doesn't mean I'm oblivious to what's in front of us, but like I say, we've got the good laws, we've got the tools, we've got the partnerships, we've certainly got the resolve to overcome some of these threats and challenges.
There's another good question in the chat if you happen to see that.
Let me see. I'll read it. JD Vance, the Medicaid. JD Vance announced Minnesota Medicaid funding would be blocked, putting healthcare services across the state at risk. What are Minnesota legislators planning to do to protect individuals, communities, healthcare professionals, and healthcare organizations? How can this group raise their voice to help bring awareness to this issue? That's great. So once again, I think it might be the courts to the rescue, right? There's some talk already that the administration just doesn't have the legal authority to cut those funds in this way for these reasons. We've seen several justifications, benefit cuts to Minnesota over the last couple of months on the basis of unrelated things. For example, some of the fraud that we've been reading and seeing about in the area of public benefits. That's not a reason. That's not a good enough legal justification or reason to just sort of target a state. Um, and it seems kind of arbitrary sometimes, and not to mention unfair, not to mention, in a sense, the way I look at it, vengeful. Um, and that's just not an adequate basis. So I'm already hearing, since that announcement, that there are not only the Attorney General's office, but some private groups as well, maybe willing to go to court, and that they might really be successful. So that's one way to push back on that. And the other way is just sort of the political way, to support those who also are pushing back. That's the best I can say. But you as nurses are very well positioned and respected to talk about that. I see the next question says, you mentioned challenges in Minnesota voting. Can you say more of that? Yeah, I can. I mean, I'll say this, as you would expect, and just like in any profession, yours, mine, anyone's, the name of the game is hope for the best, but plan for the worst, right? That's what you have to do to be responsible. And we do that with elections. We have an all hazards approach, as we call it, which means that we have to work with our partners in counties, cities, and townships to plan for things like a power outage or a tornado or a bomb threat, right? You have to do it. It would be irresponsible just to wish it never happens and not have a plan for those things. But I regret to say, and I never thought I would say, but I am saying in the year 2026 that we now have to add to that bucket the prospect, it's not a prediction, but the prospect of some sort of federal interference with the election. Again, I'm not predicting it, but it is a precaution, and it would be irresponsible of us not to think about that. What do we do if there's a last minute executive order or a seizure of elections equipment or whatever? Again, I want to be very clear. I'm not predicting it. I don't want to be alarmist here. I'm just saying, given some of what we've seen coming out of Washington, it is not ridiculous for us to at least think about what we would do with our partners all across the state if some of those things come to pass. I hope they never do. Just like I hope the bomb threat doesn't, or the power outage, or the tornado, or whatever it is. But that's a challenge that right now in 2026, we have to add that to the plan for the worst bucket. The possibility of some direct or even indirect federal interference. So we've been working a lot with federal partners and other states, and of course within Minnesota on exactly that. So that's one of the things I mean. Another example I might give you is, and this is just my opinion, but right now Congress is debating the Save America Act. And one of the things it would do is it would impose in the US for the first time ever a documentary proof of citizenship requirement. Documentary, meaning papers. You got to show papers, documents to show that you're a citizen. Now, I totally understand why anyone who heard that would say that sounds reasonable, right? I mean, there are only three major things you need to vote. You need to be a citizen, you need to be over 18, and you need to be a resident of this place you say you're a resident of. So hey, what's the big deal? Yeah, I mean, there aren't 20 things. You only need, three or so. And why not have to show papers for that? So I understand the surface appeal, but this is one of those examples, in my view, of the more you look, the less you like. So to give you one example, we have 69 million women in America who have a different last name now than the one they were born with. That's okay if you have a passport, because a passport is a document that shows your citizenship. But what if you're one of the more than 20 million American women in that category who don't have a passport? What would you do in that situation? I'll tell you what you'd do. You'd more than likely have to produce both a birth certificate and a marriage record. And if you're married more than once, that's two marriage records. And this isn't just some hypothetical thing. In the state of Kansas, about 15 years ago, they tried a Kansas state level version of the SAVE Act, documentary proof of citizenship. And before a federal judge threw out that law, they had an election using that law. And during that election in the state of Kansas, 26,000 eligible Kansans, eligible like you and me, born and raised, eligible Kansans, were unable to vote and were shut out because they couldn't produce the paperwork. I can't justify that. I can't. And so it's one of the things that you really have to think through. I know it polls very high. I understand. It has tremendous surface level appeal for understandable reasons. But when you really dig deeply and talk about how this would be implemented, man, oh man, that's a risk That's a really big risk that outweighs, I think, the reward, in my view. So that's, the latest is it's now looking less likely that that will pass the Senate for a lot of procedural reasons. But that too would be a potential um, a challenge for sure in Minnesota and every other state if that passed. So those are examples of some of the challenges that I think we face. The other one I won't go into too much is just the garden variety misinformation and disinformation that we see all the time about voting. It tends to crop up the closer you get to an election. We get it all the time. Things people say or think or believe about our office and what we do or what we don't do. You would make the hair in the back of your neck stand up, but we can go into that later. But those are some of the challenges that I think
I
of.
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
Um, so with the SAVE Act, so two questions. With the SAVE Act that's currently being debated, um, with from what I've been hearing, the Republican popularity of that is starting to wane a little bit because they're realizing that their voter base often doesn't have passports, potentially. So are they collectively, as Republicans, starting to feel like that SAVE Act might not be a great idea? And then after the State of the Union speech, where President Trump really was pushing for and saying, well, why wouldn't we? Because the only reason you wouldn't want this is because you want to steal an election.
right.
So, first question is, do you think the SAVE Act will actually pass?
Yeah.
And then second, I have a question about election judges, but I'll let you start with that.
Yeah, the latest, I reached out personally to members of our congressional delegation, and they think it's less likely than it was even a week ago to pass. And that has to do less with the reason you said about a decline in its popularity and more with just some procedural Senate rules and overcoming the filibuster and things like that. So now people are saying, well, now it looks less likely to pass than it would. I
Okay.
mean, nothing's truly dead until
Yeah.
it's really dead. But so that's the best assessment I'm getting from them.
Okay.
Um, and election judges?
Yeah, I had a question about, I wanted to verify to see if it was misinformation or not. What I've been hearing is that election judges, let's say the SAVE Act passes, and um, that election judges are being required to determine if the papers that people bring forward to register to vote, that if they authorize somebody to vote incorrectly, that they are then up for punishment by imprisonment, or like they have their own repercussions for
Yes.
guessing incorrectly or for advocating or not advocating, assessing incorrectly.
Yes, that's true. Not an honest mistake, but there are
Yeah,
circumstances in this law where there are criminal penalties for those who
yeah,
administer elections who get it wrong. That is true.
okay.
And that too, and then there are all sorts of things like it takes effect immediately upon passage.
Mhm.
Man, you look at the last 30 plus years of election laws passed at the federal level, they have 1, 2, 3, 5 year sort of
Yep.
runways, you might say, like easing into it and giving states the
Hmm.
time to change everything and change the forms and the training and hire people. There's none of that. This is effective the day it's passed, which would
Yep.
introduce, I think, a lot of unnecessary chaos and uncertainty into the system right now.
Yeah. And also with a lot of the public libraries being closed as places to actually get passports as well. Is that
I hadn't
something that's
thought of that.
happening in Minnesota, or is that are those paperwork filing stations being closed mostly in other states?
I don't know. You got me there. I'm sort of stumped. I'm not sure. I've heard about
Okay.
that issue, but I don't know about whether Minnesota is more or less affected by that.
Okay.
It's a good thing to know, though.
Julia has her
Yeah,
hand up.
yeah, I have a question. Thank you,
Well,
Secretary Simon.
sure.
Um, I know, since we've been listening to you, it's been very inspiring. I've heard you mention, nursing as a profession a couple of times. So I know sometime last year, I'm sure you are aware, the discussion that came up that nursing is not a profession again. So can you please highlight, what elected officers like you across the states in Minnesota, how are you advocating for the profession that is the most trusted? For so many years. Thank you.
Well, that's thank you for speaking up that way. Um, you're better advisor, or you're more knowledgeable about than me. What could I be doing? What should I be doing? I mean, I want to be helpful. Is that getting behind legislation at the legislature? Is that doing more things like this? Making sure that nurses are using their influence and their respect and their authority to make sure that people who are elected support nurses. You tell me. I always I want to be helpful. And so the way that we mostly interact with groups like nurses and other healthcare providers is through this, to leverage that respect that you have to cooperate and partner on making sure people have the information they need to vote. But if there's some other way that you or anyone on this call thinks that I or our office could be involved, I'm all ears.
So we have an assignment, right?
You have an assignment. There you go.
Thank you so.
I have a question,
Uh,
Kathy.
All right, Mary, go for it.
Okay. Here, let's see, I'll get in. Well, just for Steve, I'm wondering if we're going to get Steve's information of, um, so that we can send it to other people. I put a
Yes,
little
I will be
note that,
sending it.
Okay.
okay. And that's okay with Steve that we give his name and,
Sure.
and
Of
his
course.
job to another group. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I have a
Okay.
follow-up question on that, Secretary
Okay.
Steve. The minority population. I'm from originally from Nigeria. I'm gonna start from my, group. A lot of us are skeptical, like you discussed. I could be that one vote, it doesn't matter. Even if I don't vote, even if I vote, it doesn't matter. I mean, when they see me on the street, they're going to grab me if they're looking for black people, things like that, flimsy reasons. So, according to Mary, we have very big, solid African groups in the state of Minnesota, and we have huge populations. So, if you don't mind, like speaking, let's say Nigerian nurses in Minnesota is a very big organization, So if you're open to speaking to them, maybe education like this can enlighten us. I mean, when I
Absolutely.
say us, I'm part of that, group, so that we can understand that it's your voice and it's your will. I heard you said the more population or more group or person that votes, the more they get what they need, So maybe it will be a good idea for you to come out and, speak
Let
to
me
them.
know.
Okay,
Reach out to our office, and if it works for the schedule, I would love to do it.
sure. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, it seems like this year, how to vote safely.
Mhm.
Yeah, for the voter to be safe when they go to vote,
Yes.
more important than ever.
Mhm.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
When is the
Uh,
primary?
so the primary this year it's always in August. It's the second Tuesday. Oh, I wish I knew the exact date.
That's
I
okay.
know November 3rd is the general election. It's the second Tuesday after the second Monday in August.
Great.
Second Monday in
I have
August.
another question.
Hmm.
Earlier you were talking about how litigation is really an effective way in standing up to some of the policies that are attempted to being enacted. Um, where does the funding come from for something like this, and um, how does that get momentum and actually
Yes.
start?
Well, in our case, for our office, our lawyer is the Attorney General's office. So
Okay,
when
so Keith
suing,
Ellison.
being sued, we automatically get legal representation from the Attorney General's office. So when we go to court, either when we're the plaintiff, the defendant, whoever, that's what we do. But for outside groups, it's usually those groups. right? So if it's a nurses organization, or if it's a teacher organization, or if it's elections administrator, they're going to have to either have their own in-house attorney or hire an
Hmm.
attorney. And so it's a little bit of a different deal.
Okay.
All right. Is there a last question?
Yeah,
Uh,
let's do one more.
I don't know if I wanted to be last, so if somebody else.
That's okay.
Okay. What I did want to ask, and just thank you so much for being here today and all your fine work. We certainly follow it in the newspapers, and we're very grateful for you representing Minnesota. I have a question about is your office or who would be responsible for almost continuing education for our citizens on what democracy is about? You know, the
Ah,
last time we're required to learn anything, it's ninth grade. And
right.
I think, nurses have to keep up to date on our information.
Right.
And I think we have the literacy of our people is not real strong. I listened to the people that have been naturalized citizens and all the things they have to learn. And most of the people who've lived here forever don't know those things. And so, is there any program or department in the state that is responsible for that or can take
I
that?
mean, we do a piece of it, certainly around elections, right? That we do. I and we go all over the state doing that, but it's pretty focused on just the democracy issues. We're not talking about the three branches of government. We're not talking about how Congress works. We're not talking about the difference between state government and federal government, those basic sort of building blocks of civics. But I do get the sense that there are community organizations like the League of Women Voters is great on those
Mhm.
kinds of things. Yes, they're centered on voting and elections, but they do some of those things as well. There's a great group. Oh, shoot, I'm going to get the exact name wrong, but it's sort of the Social Studies Teachers Association. They do some of that too. Obviously, they're focused on the classroom and the students they teach, but they do some statewide stuff as well. The Minnesota Historical Society has from time to time gone on the road and done things like that. But to your overall point, I mean, I do think we have a civics problem in this
Mhm.
country. People who are a bit rusty, right, on some of the rules. And when you're rusty and don't understand just the basics, you don't have to be an expert, but then you're maybe more susceptible to some of the more outlandish conspiracies or other things, right?
Absolutely.
Uh, like I said at the beginning, we don't count votes, right, in our office. That's not something we do. We're not in the same room. We're not in the same county. We're not in the same city. That happens thousands of places. But it would take you right now about 60 seconds on your phone or your laptop or whatever. If you did a Google search or whatever, you would find people on social media saying that and not just me, but my colleagues across the country, the other secretaries of state, not only are we the vote counters, but we're rigging and fixing and stealing the vote. And people who don't understand their basic civics, they're going to be taken in by that stuff. That's just one example. I don't mean to make it about me, but it is one civics related example. Similarly, if you don't understand the three branches of government in this country, and someone comes along and says, well, the president can just issue an executive order and do what he wants in elections. There's some people who are just going to be completely taken in by that and say, yeah, that sounds good. I'm sure. Why can't the president just take all this over? Well, no, 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 he can't. We have a system and we all have a job to do, and one branch can't do the job of the other branch, things like that. So the more people learn about that stuff, and I'm sure you agree, the less susceptible they are to being misled sometimes on some of those issues. So I think
Yes.
people do bits and pieces, but I can't say there's one central group that, yep, we're in charge of sort of, you know, dusting off the civics textbooks and doing kind of a refresher course for Minnesota. I don't know that there's one group, but there's many groups that take a piece of it, what I would say.
Thank you. Maybe nurses can get involved.
I hope so. Let me leave you with this one thing. First, thank you again for taking your time to have this discussion. I really appreciate it. And I just want to leave my direct email with you, um, in case you think of something tomorrow or next week or next month that you want to ask about, or not just ask about, tell me about. Like, hey, you need to do this, or I wish your office did more of that. And by the way, the email I'm about to give you, there's no screener, there's no filterer, there's no assistant, it goes right to me and only to me. No one sees it.
Okay.
So here's my email, the one that goes right to me at the office. It's Steve.Simon, Simon, at state.mn, like Minnesota, .us. I'll say it again. Steve.Simon
Hmm.
at state.mn.us. So if you think of something in the next 250 days before the election day, just let me know. An idea, a pushback, feedback, question, anything you got. Just remind me if it's a month from now. Yeah, I was on that call with the nurses back in February. But I really appreciate this. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for being partners in the democracy business, as I said, and let's have a good year in democracy here in Minnesota.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
appreciate everything you do.
Thanks all.
All right. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.